Hey everybody, it is, and that's why we drink round 2 featuring Xandy Schiefer. Pew, 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 pew. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you doing?
Mm.
I've been wondering all day, like, why do you drink?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked because I didn't prompt you to do that at all. Well, because uh, so we are recording an hour late because we were supposed to record an hour ago, but then I told Xandy, oh, I want to wait until my smoothie gets here because I don't want it to like melt the whole time we're recording and then I don't have a smoothie. Also, I would like it to drink while we are recording, but as you can see, I'm not drinking anything because it took forever to get here. It finally showed up, and then as soon as I sat down on the table to record, it fell over and exploded all over the
No.
floor. So all that hour was for nothing. I still would have not had a smoothie. No, and so
Oh my God, that's terrible.
it's fine. Yesterday I was like really dehydrated. I don't think I realized it until I woke up this morning and I had one of those like dehydration like headaches where I
Hmm.
was like, if you don't drink a gallon of water right now, you're gonna fall over. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna like replenish myself with vitamins and be really good. And like I had a whole plan with the smoothie and it just literally fell apart. Um
Literally, that's awful. That's the
so
worst feeling ever.
yeah, so I chugged a bunch of water before we got on here. We'll see what happens. But
Okay.
I hope your day's going better. How are you? Is there a reason why you drink today?
Kind of. So you texted me saying we got to push it back, and I wasn't
Hmm.
complaining because I was playing RuneScape. This is my life recently. It's literally RuneScape. I don't know what else to talk about because it's all I've been doing. And then I was like, great, I actually have a chance to do something. And this will mean nothing to most people, but I got this clue scroll I was doing. It was a hard clue scroll, and I went through all the steps, and the rewards I got were really bad. So that's why I'm drinking because I'm really sad about it.
I don't know what that means, but that man, I've been there a million times. It's just
Yeah,
never good. Never good.
yeah, never good.
I tried to impress you and I looked up RuneScape trivia. I failed you because
Oh
I
no.
feel like every link I clicked on where it was like, did you know these things about RuneScape? It felt like a listicle of things everyone already knows.
Oh,
Which is weird because I don't even know what RuneScape is, and I felt like I knew these things. It was like,
yeah.
did you know that you can have a lot of different characters? And I was like,
Oh,
I
okay.
was like, I feel like that's. I assume any game gives you that option.
It just
So
kind of like sells it to you instead of like giving anything too fun about it.
there
I
was
feel like
nothing
most fun facts are very specific to the game, where if you don't play, it won't make sense.
that I saw something about magic spells, and I was like, for all I know, that is a fun fact. The fun fact to me is that there's magic spells. I didn't know that. So,
I
are
do
there?
have something though. Yes, there are multiple types of magic within RuneScape, and you can change your spell book. And
Ah,
each
okay,
one
wait,
has
I
like
would
a
love
different
RuneScape.
different theme. And actually, fun fact I have. So Gillinor is the name of like the world, and it's an anagram of religion. And part of that is because there are
Whoa.
different religions within. It's spelled like Giellinor or something. I don't. I may probably mess that up, but they're different religions, and they're kind of like factions where there's like Zamorak, Saradomin, and there are all these different. So anyway, so I actually found that
Wait,
out
that's
recently.
that
So
actually did blow my mind a little bit.
yeah, it's a little fun fact.
Does everybody who plays this know that?
No, I didn't until recently, and I've been playing this since middle school. So
That's
um,
what I. That's the kind of information I was trying to throw your way.
yeah,
I could not find it in a pinch. I tried, but
I
hey,
did.
you had one anyway.
I did do some research though, other than that, and I found a little short true crime thing, a sort of true crime, about RuneScape because there was a 19-year-old who threatened another player on RuneScape and ended up being put in prison for 6 years.
Oh my god, what
And
kind of
I
threat was
no,
it?
exactly. And I read that. I'm like, that is absurd. This is like, it's
It was
probably
like a.
stupid trolling or whatever. And then I read it, and sure enough, that's kind of what it was. It was like really dark and really specific, like school shooting related, like very,
Oh my
and like
god.
brought up Columbine. But then I read more into the case, and the FBI got involved because on this guy's computer, there were all these different. He was searching ways to make bombs. He was searching like very
Whoa.
specific school shootings,
So this guy like
terrorist
kind of meant
attack.
business.
Yeah, very like clearly was looking at specific recipes and
Whoa.
and anyway, so I got put in prison for 6 years. Was released in 2018. So there is something true crime somewhat related adjacent to RuneScape.
Wow. Now, if anyone knows any true crime about Pokemon cards, let me know. If there's like a big like Ocean's 11 theft on Pokemon cards,
Ooh.
I'd like to know about it. Wow. Okay. Wow. That actually, I learned something by accident, which was the opposite of how this was supposed to go. But it worked out. All right. My story today is the second half of the Bunnyman Bridge. So if you are popping in and you haven't listened to the most recent episode, go check that out first because you won't know what I'm talking about. But I am very excited for the fun fact I have for you at the end of this because I feel like it's, well, I feel like if I give you any lead in there, you'll know what I'm talking about. So you won't. Okay, whatever. Okay, so this is part 2 of the Bunnyman Bridge, and we last left off with this one man named Brian Conley. He finally was over not knowing what the legend's origins were. And he went out and he actually found 2 incidents back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And there was, in fact, a quote, according to a police report, rabbit with an axe, or subject dressed as a rabbit with an axe. So at least we can confirm where the origin originally started. So now in the year 2000, this is something else that Brian Conley found. He was like, okay, I found the origins, but where is what's the root of the legend coming from? Who started this rumor? And in 2000, apparently the Washington Post had a whole collection of articles called the Maryland Folklore Archive, which is something I guess Brian looked into. And in it, one of the articles mentions this student from the University of Maryland named Patricia Johnson. And in 1973, only 3 years after the Bunnyman folklore began, she was in a class called Introduction to Folklore. And she submitted a paper titled The Bunnyman. And her whole goal in this article was to figure out how many versions of the story there were after only 3 years of the legend even existing. Do you want to guess, after 3 years, how many versions of the Bunnyman urban legend there were?
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think because it's a small town.
But at this point, it had already spread through the entire DMV, which, by the way,
the fact that it's Maryland, yeah, that's a good point.
DC,
yeah.
Maryland, Virginia.
Yeah,
now it's in Maryland.
It was started in Virginia, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Ooh. Because when I'm gonna guess. No, I don't. I don't know if I'm. 17.
You know what? No. But I was trying to think.
Many?
No. It was actually shockingly not enough.
What?
There were, in those 3 years, the story had spread to the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, it got up to 54 different versions.
54?
It had spread like wildfire. And it's not shocking why even today, I mean, the town I grew up in was 45 minutes away from where this story supposedly happened. And I grew up hearing a bunch of different versions of it, which makes sense if I'm only 45 minutes away and people 3 hours away are hearing about it. But it's either, oh, he ate bunnies, he dresses a bunny and killed people. Also, he's a ghost on Halloween. I mean, it's all over the place. So, and what's really interesting about Patricia Johnson's paper where she wrote about this, out of the 54 versions, she actually broke it down to figure out what parts were changing the most often, things like that. By the way, I think this class still exists. If you're at the University of Maryland, it's English 460.
That's so cool that's existed in the 70s and is still going today. I think that's such a cool class to be able to take. Oh my gosh.
There was one class that I'm so mad I never took at my school. I think it was we never had a media communications. I grew up in college. I knew I'm in comm or I take communications. I always thought of it as human communications or human behavior. And then I went to BU and the College of Communications and it was all media. So I had to readjust my brain. But in college, I was a comm minor. So I did human communication. And one of the classes was called magic demonology and weird beliefs or something. It was crazy. It was apparently the professor had like seen demons before. And I found out about this like the last semester before I graduated, so I couldn't take another class. I was so upset.
Oh my God, that sounds wild. Whoa.
Anyway, if you're at CNU and you take that class, please send me your notes. Okay, so she found out there's 54 versions, and she broke it down that out of these 54 versions, 14 of them were completely different locations. I guess Bunnyman Bridge just kind of became like a catch-all for like a bridge nearby. 18 of them, only 18 of them involved a hatchet. So that's like, what, a quarter of them? A third of them, I think.
Yeah, that's like exactly a third, right? Okay, never mind. I don't know. No, this isn't a math
18
podcast,
18 times 3 is 50. Yeah, it is. Right? It's literally a third. Wow. Wait, together we're pretty good at math.
That worked out, surprisingly.
So only a third of them involve an axe anymore, which is interesting because the first versions of the Bunnyman Bridge I heard didn't have an axe. But there were slaughtered humans and bunnies, so I guess I never even thought about the weapon. I just... What? And then 14 of them involved attacks on cars, which the first incident was a couple that was parked out in a field. 9 of them involved a parked couple. And 5 of them had to do with vandalism, which was from the second incident where he was attacking a porch. And only 3 of them involved a murder.
Oh, that's kind of surprising. I feel like that's the first thing, especially if you're adding things or changing things to the story, especially if you want to make it scarier or you're telling it around a campfire. I don't know how this works, but I imagine you want to add murder to it.
That's what I thought. I definitely thought the same. I was like, well, murder's going to be at least the one thing everything has in common. But I guess, I don't know if, I guess the murder part is that, you know, you better not go near the bridge at night or you'll get murdered. But I guess there really isn't too many stories involving a murder origin because just like how I had never heard the version where his first victim was another person from the hospital. Remember, he killed somebody from the hospital? I never heard that version, so maybe that was one of the 3. But anyway, since this study was done over 50 years ago now, those 54 versions could have grown significantly, or some of them might have even just faded away, or there could be brand new ones. I mean, we definitely need a recount. So Patricia Johnson, if you're still a student at University of Maryland, please recount them for me, especially because it's involved over time. So one of the things that I think it was Brian Conley who realized this, but based on the generation you're a part of that grew up with this story, there are different kind of themes. It's like it's evolved over time based on what's spooky now. So in the 70s, people kind of heard the baseline, the closest thing to the truth, because the actual incidents had just happened. So it was more based on like vandalism or just a creepy guy in the area. In the 80s, it became a little more, they tried to incorporate it into like satanic panic. So during sleepovers, you would hear about it, like maybe he was summoned by the devil or something. But the kids that were our generation who grew up in the 90s and after, it's becoming more and more supernatural. So I never grew up with he was a ghost that only showed up on Halloween, but apparently that's the new version kids are hearing.
Interesting.
So it's very cool to see that based on the decade, it's editing itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like I said, by 1973, when this paper from school came out about how many versions there were, the Bunnyman story had spread all over the place. Different versions had now become, I guess, I don't know what you would call it, not allegories.
But like representative of like their times kind of thing?
Like it became one of those things where parents would tell their kids about it to scare them into good behavior.
Yeah.
Where it was like, don't do this or the Bunnyman's going to come get you.
Yeah,
or
as a German, we just call those just stories. They're all that, you know.
Just good wishes for the end of the night.
Everything has to happen.
Bedtime dreams. So they would say like, oh, you don't be disobedient or we'll leave you in the woods and the Bunnyman will get you. Like our parents said some of the weirdest shit that now today would not fly. They also, anytime someone would go missing, the rumor would always spread that maybe the Bunnyman got them. I guess one of the things they told kids a lot was if your animals got out, then the Bunnyman would find them. So that it, like forced kids to be more attentive to like not letting the dog out or something like that. So it was just used as kind of a sweeping warning for the
Yeah.
community.
Interesting.
And again, by the 80s, it became more of the satanic panic folklore. And so it was like good around campfires and, sleepovers and things like that. And by the 90s, in 1999, when the internet hit, it got a whole new wave of people because now it's not just spreading throughout the community, it's spreading on the internet. So the main website that it spread on is called Castle of Spirits. And I don't know if you've heard about it.
I have not.
I hadn't either, and now I feel like I need to bookmark it if it's telling me the truth. But apparently it is one of the oldest consistently running archives of ghost stories on the internet. It's been around since 1997.
Does it look the exact same way as it
Yeah.
did in 19? I love it. I love
It sure
that.
does. It sure does. I don't know if it's still working. I mean, it does work because I logged on and it exists, but I don't know if anyone's still posting on there. But Castle of Spirits and a guy named Timothy Forbes posted the story of the Clifton Bunnyman. And that was when it really took off again. I'm assuming it attracted some interest. I don't want to... You mentioned last week, you said something that I bit my tongue, so I didn't say anything. But you mentioned that it sounded a little like Donnie Darko.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is set in a town called Middlesex, Virginia.
Oh.
And the director, Richard Kelly, he grew up in Virginia. So he actually was born in Newport News, which is where I went to college. And he grew up in Richmond, which is an hour away from me.
No way.
So there's a very large chance, it has not been confirmed, but I'm pretty convinced that he knew about the Bunnyman growing up, and that might have been the inspiration for Frank the Bunny and Donnie Darko.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Which, if you haven't seen Donnie Darko, 14-year-old me would have thought you were just the worst human on earth. I would have just been like, you don't even know culture. You know nothing about anything. But it's Jake Gyllenhaal and his either a hallucination or a ghost. It was never really explained even in the movie. But he's followed around by a man in a bunny suit. And there's a famous line where he says, "Why are you in the bunny suit?" And then Frank says something like, "Why are you wearing that human suit?" It's supposed to be like really philosophical and blow your mind. Did you watch it?
I have. It's been a while though. I watched it pretty late. Like at a point where I felt like I was obligated to finally watch it, and then I haven't watched it since. I really enjoyed it, but I don't really remember too much. I just remember, of course, Frank sticks with you.
He's got to.
costume. Yeah.
Especially because the face on him is a little creepy. It's not like a cute Easter Bunny suit.
Yeah.
And so the only real premise I can tell you about Donnie Darko is this bunny is telling him that like the world's going to end in 28 days. Mm-hmm. And I kind of hate the movie in that like the point of it is it makes no sense. You're supposed to make your own interpretation off of it. Like the director has even been like, I don't know what it's about. I just fucking went for it, which is so sad. Can you imagine if he really had a real vision for it and nobody understood it? So now he's kind of like backed away and he's like, it meant nothing.
Or maybe he heard all of these theories about what it meant and was like, oh shit, that's a better thing than mine. So I'm just going to pretend I didn't have one in mind.
Whatever. He really made a name for himself. I don't know if he's done anything else, but he gets to die knowing he made Donnie Darko.
Oh yeah, cult classic for sure. I mean, it probably got also commercial success too, but I mean, that's still one that people point to. Yeah.
I still think it definitely, my adolescence was changed because of Donnie Darko. So that the fact that my hometown legend was based on like one of my favorite movies as a teenager, I just thought I was on top of the world with like spooky folklore. But so again, it's never been confirmed, but it's a well-known suspicion that the Bunnyman Bridge is what inspired Frank. And so here are just a few theories of who this Bunnyman is, because like I said last week, there were 2 incidents that actually happened with a man in a bunny suit within the same week on the same block, or one block over, whatever. And it was a man in a bunny suit with an axe, but we never found out who it was because the first incident never had a police report officially filed. And the second one was a vandalism report, but very vague. Mm-hmm. So we never got the actual person. The only ID we ever got was that it was someone in either their late teens or early 20s. And I think one of the guys said he was 5 feet tall, about 175 pounds. And I think he was a white guy. So one theory for who this is he is actually, well, here's okay. Here's another part. Let me do this first. Here's a part of the folklore of like one of the 54 variations is that they think this was a mental patient who escaped, not just to escape being in a mental hospital, but because he needed to be out so he could avenge his dead wife and child. That was one of the many versions. And I guess it made a real name for itself. So when they tried to research it, I think Brian Conley, when he tried to research this, he was like, let's at least put this one to bed. Like, if this person does exist, was he really out to avenge his wife and kid? So he went through all of the Fairfax County records from the 1870s to the 1970s, a whole 100 years.
Wow.
And he looked specifically at murders that there was more than one person and one of them was a child. Which,
Smart,
sure.
yeah.
Shockingly and happily, out of 100 years, there was only 3 cases.
Okay.
So really dialed in on them. One of them was from 1949, and it was a mom and a daughter. The mom had been beaten up and shot by her husband, and the baby daughter was buried alive.
Jesus.
And he was able to exclude this one because the husband was convicted, which means he couldn't have escaped anywhere. And he was officially convicted. And yeah. And he killed the family too. So he couldn't avenge anyone if he was the killer, you know?
Yeah.
So that one was out. The second one was in 1927. The wife's name was Minnie. And then there were actually 2 daughters. So that also kind of goes against the story. But a man broke into their house. I guess he actually called and said like, oh, can I talk to your husband? And then when he found out that the husband was out, he came over and he beat up the wife and kids.
Jesus.
And I guess the kids ended up dying. The wife was able to survive and ID him. But so then that takes them out of the picture because the wife survived. The last one is from 1918. And it was a 14-year-old girl who left the house for the day and never came back. But she was, several things. The police found out several things that might have happened to her. But one thing was for sure is that they found her tied to a tree and strangled by her own apron.
Jesus.
And she was 14. So the killer was never discovered, which makes this story more fitting. But there was no mother who also died to be avenged. And plus this story is from 1918, which is too old of a story, or it doesn't fit the timeline. So so he was able to wipe out the one theory of like, oh, he's out to like, get revenge on whoever hurt his family. That one's out. So now I'll bring in the conversation of, so who the heck is this guy based on what we know? The best theories people could come up with is that it could have been, and most realistically, it could have been someone who was really mad about people trespassing. But then also, how would he know whether or not someone was trespassing? Because it's not like he lived on the properties that he went up to and said, you're on someone else's property. He most likely had some mental illness. And he honestly, another theory is he could have just been someone not dressed as a bunny at all. Because if you remember the first incident, even the 2 people who saw him had differing opinions on what he looked like. And one of them very much seemed to say that he looked like he was dressed like he was a member of the KKK. In that area at that time, I would not be surprised if that's what happened. If this dude just showed up in a random field wearing like one of those tall white hoods, like, I don't know, you tell me. Who knows? Another theory is he could have literally been a fucking serial killer. And he smashed through people's car and tried to hurt them. So could be a serial killer. Another option is that he was a very unhinged man, but specifically he was having a hard time adjusting to the new development in the area. That is probably the most accurate guess, besides maybe being a white supremacist.
Well, what's interesting with that one is because, could have been both. With that one, if they describe the man as late teens, early 20s, I feel like that, get off my property, that crotchety, it makes me think of a much older person. So the fact that he's described that way, I feel like that description doesn't lend itself to someone who would not be happy about new development.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
And I agree with you. I think it's probably someone younger. The reason that they bring this up, that it might just be someone adjusting to like new development plans, is because I guess during the 70s there was a huge change in the town where it went from being a really small area. I guess after World War II, it was super rural then. And then by the 1950s, they started building some houses. And by the 1960s, it was becoming a whole new area. And by the 70s, they had plans to just completely make it like its own city.
Yeah.
And I guess it was very common for people in the area who had lived there for generations to really not like this.
Yeah.
I guess a lot of people had a hard time coping about getting rid of the rural area. And one of the main reasons was because they felt like their sense of community was being threatened by city life and the trope of not knowing everyone you live next to. And here's my thought. If he loved his community so much and he was so close to his community and knew everyone in it, why could no one ID him?
Yeah.
That's my thought. So,
or were they protecting him? Because what if he was a racist asshole, but he was their friend or their neighbor, and they're like, oh yeah,
but
this
they're
happened.
my racist asshole.
Yeah, but it definitely wasn't a Klan hood. It was definitely a very positive religious thing.
The only thing they could say was he looked like a bunny, but we're not saying anything else about him.
We just want like the insurance to pay for our car window. We don't want this guy in trouble.
So actually, you know what? Let's throw that in the ringer, because all these are such vague guesses anyway. Like, who knows? But, you know, what's interesting about the area is, I guess, the Bunnyman Bridge and this theory that he was just, like, a simple man who loved his community, which is so ironic that that's how we've turned this into something. He apparently has inspired other people in the area who now live in a much more populated Fairfax County. They have now started their own collective with the intention of bettering their connection with their neighbors.
Oh.
And it's called the Bunnyman Bridge Collective.
Oh my gosh, that's kind of fun.
I have a few quotes. It's so weird that they like turn something like kind of gnarly into something very sweet. But they are, quote, inspired by the Bunnyman's mission to preserve community, which is so funny because he's throwing axes at people, but okay. One of the people part of the collective named Jessica Callista says, quote, the Bunnyman Bridge Collective counteracts the fragmented relationships between neighbors who know each other only well enough to nod hello to each other. We recapture interconnectivity in others to put an end to the isolation and alienation experienced by people living in suburbia. And they host art events and exhibits, and they are hoping to bring in other locals. It's basically like a friendship group if you're in a city and want friends. It's very sweet. And Jessica also said, the Bunnyman may not have known how to stop suburban sprawl, but he wasn't going out without being heard. He may have been the perfect storm of mental instability and exasperation at the unraveling of Virginia's small-town communities. But the Bunnyman is an icon for shaking things up, doing things in a different way, and not accepting the status quo of making noise. He's the underbelly, the weird, the urban legend in Fairfax, which on the surface is calm, but the Bunnyman torments suburbia.
Okay, this might be weird, but
First
I got
of all,
goosebumps from that.
It was, honestly...
It's a lot.
It was very flowery, but like it sounds like today's version of how Shakespeare probably talked. Like,
yeah.
Very well said. Like, you really, like, I understand your mission entirely.
Yeah.
But so they're just a collective of artists who just want some friends in the city and want to know the community, and I think that's very sweet. I also think they really took a completely different spin on who the Bunnyman might have been.
I really respect that. And it reminds me, this is kind of off topic, but I've been thinking of Isaac Brock, who's the lead singer of Modest Mouse, and it's one of my favorite bands. But they have this album, Lonesome Crowded West, and the whole point of it was about the sprawl that was all these strip malls popping up, and so there's all these themes. And so as you were saying this stuff about the Bunnyman, I'm like, I feel like Isaac Brock is like also the Bunnyman, like going out with all this noise and making noise about like you can't stop it, but like talking about how freaking awful all of these strip malls popping up and taking away our community.
I like how the Bunnyman and the Modest Mouse could like for sure. It's like one's the good and one's the evil. They're each other's like chaotic evil,
exactly.
you know. Anyway, no, that's part. That's yeah. Well, then maybe Modest Mouse, if you're listening, go join the Bunnyman Bridge Collective. You sound like you fit right in. Anyway, that's one spin on who the person might have been, and they've at least taken it by storm. I don't think there's any other theories out there on who the Bunnyman is where like organizations are being created. So I'm going to run with that because they found a way to make a nice spin on it. But so growing up in Virginia, the main story that you hear, or like the kind of the log line you hear at high school when they're like, oh, you want to go to the Bunnyman Bridge tonight? It's just that if you go at night, the whole point is to like drive under the bridge and in general experience the creepiness, especially on Halloween. But I think a lot of people will say like, yo, you have to go and you park under the bridge or even get out and just walk around in the woods near the bridge and see what happens.
Ooh.
A lot of people do the like, oh, you have to sit under the bridge and honk your horn 3 times or say Bunnyman's name 3 times. It's just like a thing you do on Halloween.
Yeah.
But I guess around, I don't know why this year, but I saw one article say by 2003, it became such a massive, like a well-known Halloween thing that teenagers would do. Instead of trick-or-treating, because like you could just literally go get candy for free next door. I don't know why people stopped doing that. But people would just do it so often on Halloween that the police had to start getting involved. And just as an FYI, if you live in the area and you want to go to Bunnyman Bridge on Halloween, Fairfax County Police monitor the site every Halloween, and they allegedly even have a 24/7 camera pointed at the tunnel. Apparently, there was one Halloween in 2011 that was so bad that there was a 14-hour traffic checkpoint, like a roadblock that you waited 14 hours to be able to get out.
Oh my God.
And there were people who like even came from Pennsylvania, I guess, to like go to the Bunnyman Bridge, and over 200 people were turned away that night.
My God. Okay, this is wild.
At that point, you should start like just selling tickets.
Yeah.
Like that's, I mean, I literally, especially during COVID, and there's still some that after COVID, it was so successful, they're doing it again this year, even though people can get out of their cars. In LA, there's so many drive-in Halloween events now where like you drive through a pumpkin patch and it's all lit up with pretty lights and everything. Why on earth didn't they make this like a jump scare drive-through attraction with 200 people?
Yeah, I'm doing one of those in Long Island. And I looked and there are a bunch of them in Long Island. Like there's so many of these things, and it's like, yeah, take advantage of this, especially with that kind of story. I mean,
I know
these other ones, it's just like, oh, we have some space, let's create one. But here you have not only an area for it, you have a freaking Bunnyman story.
I mean, if you're the like mayor of Fairfax or something, I'm just giving you like an idea that at least sell tickets for pictures next to the Bunnyman Bridge or something.
Yeah.
Or have someone dress as the Bunnyman Bridge. Like just throw like a bucket of fake blood on an Easter bunny costume, have them stand by the bridge all night and have people take pictures.
What's this bridge look? I didn't Google it. What does the bridge look like? Is it just just concrete, just kind of boring looking overpass?
It's a very boring looking overpass.
Okay.
It's actually I don't know what it looks like now, but online I saw someone leave a note being like, since I went, or since I used to go as a kid, it actually looks a lot different than it used to. They've like built it up, or it doesn't look as creepy as it used to. But it's also right next to a dead end. So I think a lot of cops were able to tell, especially during Halloween, like, oh, if you're driving through the tunnel, like there's nothing on the other side. So like you're clearly going. I'm sure it's also a great spot to park if you're a couple on Halloween and like hoping to run to the Bunnyman. So I think apparently there's a dead end not too far away. So there was a note on like Atlas Obscura too that said like, if you end up going, just know you're gonna have to awkwardly back out afterwards and drive back home. But the area has super sharp winding roads, just a heads up if you are going. Also, the tunnel is a single car tunnel. It's very tiny. Oh. So don't speed through it because someone might be coming out on the other side or people might be walking or something. And it apparently leads to a dead end. Again, I say apparently or allegedly because I never went because my mom always got mad at me when I said I was thinking about going. So now that I'm an adult, next time I go home, I should probably just check it out for myself and call it a day. But yeah, so just heads up, especially don't go on Halloween because either the police will turn you away or you'll get stuck in like a several hour long roadblock. The most recent update is that in 2018, there actually was a man found dead there, and it seemed like it was a homicide. I don't know any more about that case, but it was only a few hundred feet away from the bridge. Oh. So I guess it invigorated people to tell the story all over again, or it just fits into the zeitgeist of this, I guess.
Yeah, and it just adds to it all, you know. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And here's my fun fact for you. This I'm just going to end on this because it's very delicious. Is that there's one man named Jim Waters who I guess still lives in Fairfax or lives in the Virginia area. He's in his 50s now, but when he was 11, he would hear about the Bunnyman Bridge all the time, and I guess it terrified him. He was afraid to even like walk to school or ride his bike to school. And I guess him and his local friends, they all have their own version of Bunnyman Bridge and the stories that they heard growing up. And so he's in a band, which I don't know the pronunciation.
Echo and the Bunnymen.
No, it is called. I don't think it's in English. It's Mantua, Mantua, okay. And then the second word is Finials.
Finials. I think that's like a part of a house. I think.
A Mantua Finials.
I don't know about the first part, but that yeah, I think that's like a.
It's finals with an A before the. It's an I before the A.
Yeah, Finial.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an ornamental thing on a roof.
Huh? What's Mantua? Look that up.
Okay, Mantua.
Mantua Finials.
Mantua. It's a city in Ohio. Oh, it's also a city in Italy. It was an island settlement in Italy. So
interesting. Well, okay, so that's the name of his band, and I guess all the members are locals from Virginia, or at least people who grew up hearing about the Bunnyman story. Mm-hmm. And the way I've written the origin to this in my head is that they had all at one point gotten together and talked about their variations of the Bunnyman, and none of them knew the truth of, you know, what origin is correct or what legend is correct. All of them got together and they wrote a 2.5-hour rock opera, which is, by the way, 26 songs / 3 CDs, which I purchased. And it is a 2.5-hour rock opera from the Bunnyman's perspective.
Whoa.
Which, like, are you kidding me?
I love that.
That's so fun. Even in 2013 to 2014, they even performed parts of it live at a place called Jam and Java. It's, by the way, you would love that place. That was like one of the main venues my friends would go to for shows in Richmond. You would love Jam and Java. Actually, I don't. It might be in DC. I totally forgot which way. It's either up or down from Fredericksburg. No, actually, one of my best friends from home, it's her favorite venue ever. But yeah, apparently they performed there for a year and did different pieces of the Bunnyman show.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, I did listen to some of it. I did purchase all 3 CDs. So if you ever wanted to sit down and listen to it, I can send you my account to it.
Yeah. The
music is actually pretty good. So
they need at this point, especially now finding this out, they need a Bunnyman festival.
They need I don't know why, because doesn't Cincinnati have like a Loveland Frogman thing?
I don't know. Maybe that's a good question. They should.
Oh, I'm thinking of shit. It's another small local cryptid. Dover Demon. I don't remember where
they have
it was,
the Loveland Frogman race. I just Googled. So there's like a 5K.
Okay, but there should be a Bunnyman where you run through the bridge at the end.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Come on. That should be. I don't know why that. I'm telling you, if you are part of small government in Fairfax County, what the fuck are you doing? Like, if your job is like community, which, especially if your whole job is community, and one of the whole theories about this is he just wanted community again. Mm-hmm. You could honor the Bunnyman Bridge and then thus keep him away from harming people if you just bring community together at the bridge.
Yes.
I mean,
I love
you're
it.
foolish to not.
Yeah. Oh my God. You already have a musical artist that can perform there.
For 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours. You're set.
You got your set, your whole set.
Amazing.
You could have pictures. Literally, I'm not kidding about like the Easter Bunny with like a bucket of paint on him. Like, I mean, there are definitely Easter Bunny costumes. I know at the Fairfax Mall you can take pictures with a bunny man during Easter, but like, you know, these things are available to you and you're not doing it. So, and also during Halloween, I don't know why you wouldn't just make this a money grabbing situation. Like, capitalism, but you know, it would. Just saying.
I feel like, you know how you were talking about the different decades having different versions? I feel like the Gen Z Bunny Man is a capitalist. So I I think that might be, you might be like
That's
feeding into
actually
that
probably so
story,
true.
actually.
I'm very excited to see what Gen Z does with the Bunnyman. At this point, they could at least like what the fuck's a weird little Bunnyman dance going to be on the bridge? Like some
Yeah,
crazy
so
little
true.
some little hop or something.
Oh my
But
gosh.
anyway, that's the story of the Bunnyman Bridge.
Oh, that was amazing. And I've got some music to check out too. I love that. Oh, cool.
I can't wait to send it to you. I really did buy it in the middle of the night with the intention of like at some point I'm just going to sit down and just take every word in. I was like, I'll probably send it to you so we can analyze it together.
I love it. I love it. I have something that actually kind of when you were going through your story and you're talking about how things changed over the years,
Yeah.
that's kind of my
Ooh.
where my story is. I'm gonna go over through the years and a couple hundred years and show how a specific story has been changed or like added to, I'd say. So first,
so
I'll
fun.
give the initial background and the basics of the case, and this is the case of Bathsheba Ruggles Spooner, and she
Ooh,
was
every name was better than the last.
I'm gonna hate having to say Bathsheba over and over again. It is very difficult for my mouth to make that noise, so I'm sorry in advance, everyone, for having to listen.
I just told Xandy this yesterday. All I knew was that the person's name was Bathsheba, and I was like, I just did a whole story about someone named Bathsheba, and I had to say the name a million times. It was awful. Also, if your name is Bathsheba, it's such a pretty name. I just saying it was really rough for me because it definitely feels like sounds like Bath and Sheba, and there should be a space between them in speech. So it really did sound rough coming out of my mouth. So good luck.
Thank you. I've been practicing, but I don't think it did much good, so we'll see. So her story is actually it's a story of the first ever capital case since the American Revolution.
Whoa.
So it starts with her birth, Sandwich, Massachusetts, February 15th, 1746.
Okay.
Her dad was a very wealthy lawyer and a military leader. He was Brigadier General Timothy Ruggles. I know, these names are just not...
I feel like if I ever time traveled, every person I met back there who like told me their last name, I would just have to take a moment and chuckle to myself. They're all so silly.
They are silly, and it makes it a little more whimsical, even though it's maybe not the most
It feels like
story.
Willy Wonka's cousin. It's like
Yeah,
Brigadier
exactly.
Ruggles. It's like Winnie the Pooh's best friend.
Oh my god, or like an animated like dog in some movie, like happens to be in the military.
Like I think of do you remember the movie Cats and Dogs?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I feel like he would have led the dog team
Yeah,
against the cats. You know?
Like a gruff German Shepherd, Brigadier
No,
Brigadier
with
General
Ruggles, with Ruggles, he's got all those jowls.
Oh,
With
yeah.
you know?
Oh my god, I love it. So Ruggles, he was the leader of the Tory party, which I needed a reminder of this, which meant he was a supporter of the king and was a loyalist during the revolution. So
Okay.
no one really liked him because they were like, "Hey, you're not on board with this revolution thing." And in 1766, and the theory is partially because of him being a loyalist and not being very popular, he arranged for his daughter, Bathsheba, to be married to a very wealthy farmer who was of pretty good standing, and his name was Joshua Spooner, and Joshua's father was a Boston merchant.
Okay.
So Joshua, though, was abusive. He was an abusive husband, and he was unfaithful as well to her. And a court deposition described him as weak, easily intimidated, and unable to sustain a manly importance as the head of the family. And I weirdly I don't like, but it's funny, not funny. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. But basically,
It's
the big
silly.
insult
It's always
is...
silly.
It's silly. It's silly that the way they describe him was like, oh, he's weak, he's not manly. They didn't care about the abuse thing, that he was
Right.
abusive and unfaithful. They're like, oh, he was such a weak man, so weak-willed.
I know. Maybe they were ahead of their time, and they knew that being abusive doesn't make you a strong man, and they were
True.
trying to hit him where it hurt. They were like, "You're not even that strong." I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good. I like that. I like that. That
I
look
like
on
to
it.
think
I
that
like
they were that aware of what masculinity was in the 1700s.
Yes.
Whatever. We could all hope. We can just hope.
Let's hope. So then in 1777, there's an American soldier who was coming home from war named Ezra Ross. He fell sick in Brookfield, Massachusetts, where the Spooners were living, and Bathsheba took care of him until he felt well enough to continue home. Then Ezra went to return back to war and stopped by the Spooners again in July 1777, and then after the British surrendered at Saratoga, New York, he returned to the Spooner household again, but this time he stayed for multiple months. He went on business trips with Joshua, so those two were tight, and he also had an affair with Bathsheba, so those two were also tight.
They were super duper tight. They were hanging out.
Yes, and then he ended up getting Bathsheba pregnant in January of 1778. So,
and then him and that baby were pretty tight.
No.
Well, does the baby make it?
You'll see.
Okay.
You'll see.
I said it too soon.
Yeah. So her and her family were all loyalists, so they were not very popular. So Bathsheba was really worried about having this affair, and people were going to find out because she was pregnant. And apparently, people were getting tarred and feathered for loyalists specifically. Were getting tarred and feathered for just being loyalists. So this on top of it was just an extra layer of something to be afraid of. So she came up with the idea to kill her husband, because she thought no one's going to find out if I just kill my husband, because then no one's going to care and he's just going to be dead and then I can say it was his.
Okay.
So, but the plan was not well thought out, and that kind of comes up later. So she asked Ezra to help poison Joshua. So he took a bottle of nitric acid with him on one of the business trips they went on together, but he backed out of the plan and decided to just go home instead of returning to the Spooner household. But while they were gone, not even knowing that he had backed out of the plan, Bathsheba met these two British soldiers who were returning from war, and because she was a loyalist, she took them in. They were Private William Brooks and Sergeant James Buchanan. They were prisoners of war who had escaped. So she was like, yep, come on in, because she supported them and their cause, and she told them all about her plot to kill her husband. So
just a willy-nilly, just like, I could. The conversation's pretty dry. I've got something that'll spice things up.
Again, not very well thought out.
Yeah, she seems a little eager to tell someone about her plan.
Yeah, and I imagine at that time, if you're a loyalist, like, you're probably somewhat rare. So she was like,
right.
Oh, I can trust these soldiers because we're all on the same side of war.
Right.
And so then her husband returned from his trip and still alive, and she was like, okay, maybe I can recruit these two men to kill him. And they agreed. And one night,
I'm sorry,
why not?
What? I feel like we're really overlooking the bond that they must have all immediately had for her to feel safe enough to tell them that she's going to kill her husband, and for them to just be like, yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Something happened. Something happened.
She did end up paying them, so it didn't say that she offered it beforehand. But my assumption is she also said, "Hey, I will pay you." But all the sources I read basically said that she paid, but it never said that that's how she got them to do it. So that next night, when he was out, and then he came back, and then they jumped him and killed him. They beat him to death, and then the three of them threw his body headfirst into the well that they had on the property. So Bathsheba gave the two soldiers, money from Joshua's safe, as well as his watch and his shoe buckles, which were silver, and they had his initials on them. Shoe buckles at the time, this is a whole thing. And I remember because I had read an article on my other podcast on Human Seeking Human, and it was something about belt buckles and how those were such a popular thing until a king used ribbon instead, and then that became popular. So then people weren't buying these expensive belt buckles, and like the value went down on these buckles. It was a whole
this is the
thing.
shit that I care about. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because if you just said belt buckle, I was gonna deep dive belt buckles later alone. I'm so glad you already did the research
shoe
for
buckles.
me.
These are shoe buckles.
Oh, shoe buckles, right.
So like it was even like less of a thing now, but it's you think those like stereotypical like pilgrim things with the shoe buckle, like there's that like shiny part of the shoe. Yeah, they were apparently it was a whole thing back then.
Well, it makes sense now. It didn't even cross my stupid little 21st century mind that like shoe buckles would cost a lot because they were solid metal like
Yeah.
that. Of course they're expensive, and
Yeah.
if they're silver, forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. So then they actually found the body very quickly, the authorities. I did a lot. I went through so many articles. There was never any reason why they found him so quickly. I don't know if someone like reported it, but it said within 24 hours, basically.
Well, it sounds
they
like
found the body.
Bathsheba was a real chatty Cathy. I wonder if she just
been it.
she might have just been like, I know where a dead body is, you know.
Well, she's not alone because the two men that she hired, the two soldiers, were found drinking at a tavern in town where they were showing off these belt buckles, or sorry, now I've got the belt buckles on the brain, these shoe buckles with his initials on them. So they were picked up real quick, and they found Ezra in the same tavern, but hiding in the attic because he heard that the authorities were coming. And so the men quickly, at least the two men, I don't think Ezra did this, but the two men quickly were like, oh, Bathsheba, it was the wife. She like put us onto this. So Brooks, one of the soldiers, was charged with the assault on Joshua Spooner, and then Buchanan and Ezra Ross were charged with aiding and abetting in the murder, and then Bathsheba was charged with inciting, abetting, and procuring the manner and form of the murder. They all pleaded not guilty, and they were represented by Levi Lincoln, distant relative of Abraham Lincoln, who later became Thomas Jefferson's first attorney general. It was really interesting to read about these people, and they all have their own big Wikipedia pages, and they were all very big people that were involved with this, like on both the defense and the prosecution.
It is fun. It's a TV idea, although TMTM don't take our idea. But I would love a show, like a historical show about all of the side characters that we hear about and what their lives were like. Like, what was Abigail Adams' sister-in-law or a cousin up to? Like, I feel like they've got some wild story that totally got deflated by the fact that they were related to someone more famous, you know?
Like they're adjacent to these people, but they got completely overshadowed by what people talked about over the years. And after a few hundred years, a couple hundred years, then you start losing all these stories. I mean,
I started getting into I think I've mentioned this on the show before, so sorry everyone. But on Ancestry, I found out that my great grandfather was a real piece of shit in New York. But he had like a big Wikipedia page about him, and I was like, I didn't know that. Like, apparently he was like so misogynistic that New York voted that women can vote.
my gosh.
Like just in spite of him, because at like one of the council meetings, he like said such horrific things about women that they were like, ew, like whatever you say, we don't want. My God. And they just like voted women into New York. So glad I share his blood. But then I was able to like click on other people that like knew him, and it became a whole thing. And I was like, it's such a shame that all of us are probably related to someone with a Wikipedia account. We just don't even know it.
It's weird, right? And then you think back to this, and it's so long ago that like one little branch can go off into so many different things. I also just started watching first two episodes of the show Loki. And so I'm like thinking of like the branches, and like I'm like one little thing can cause so much. And
I will do my best to not overtake your story by just telling you everything I feel about Loki. But when you're done with it, I would love a text from you.
We'll talk later for sure. Anyway, the problem is, so this lawyer, Levi Lincoln, couldn't do much for Buchanan and Brooks, the two soldiers, because they both signed a confession saying that about their full involvement, despite pleading not guilty. But for Ezra, he said that Ezra had only just found out that same day about this plan, because he backed out of the original plan, and then he only that day, a few hours before they killed him, found out that that they were going to do it this way. He didn't participate, and the lawyer claimed that he only pretended to approve of the plan so that his lover, Bathsheba, would still be chill with him, basically. He was like, he wanted to like be, on good terms. Sure. And then as for Bathsheba, he argued that she had a, quote, disordered mind. She already killed one person she cared about. Like, of course you want to stay on her good side if you can. Yeah, exactly, right? And then one of the reasons why she had such a proof that she had a, quote, disordered mind was because of how bad the plan was. So basically, because there was no escape plan, it wasn't really well formulated. violated. Basically, it was because her mind wasn't right. So therefore,
Right.
she should be let off, or at least let off pretty easy.
Right.
And none of it worked, and all 4 of them were sentenced to be executed. Bathsheba petitioned for a postponement due to her pregnancy because at this point she was, I'll say she claimed, in their eyes, she claimed to be 5 months pregnant. And a first group of examiners argued against her being pregnant. They actually did their quote-unquote tests and said, no, she's not. She's lying. There's no way she's 5 months pregnant. But then they had the test done again, whatever tests these were at the time. And this panel, the second panel, said, actually, she is pregnant. We should wait at least until the baby's born. The court did not grant the postponement, and the 4 were executed on July 2nd, 1778. It was a crowd of 5,000 people in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Wow.
And they did an autopsy, and sure enough, she was 5 months pregnant. So this led to a lot of controversy, obviously, because a lot of people wanted her hanged because she was a loyalist, especially, and she did commit this crime. But then once they found out that she was telling the truth about this, like, people were obviously upset at this decision. And also, it turns out that the man who signed her death warrant was a staunch anti-loyalist, and he was a member of the innermost circle of the Sons of Liberty. And he was also a close relation to Joshua Spooner, the murder victim, to Joshua's stepbrother. So
huge
this guy,
conflict of interest.
Very huge conflict of interest. And all of this came up after the fact. And all this does lead me to the research that I did, which was the most quote-unquote fun part of this, because the views of both her and her case changed over the years or was added to, and it was so interesting to get to go through and read about all of these, and also the different reasons why she popped up in the news, because there were times when she wasn't mentioned in any newspapers for decades, and then suddenly she'd pop up again. And so the earliest mention, because I have that podcast, The Human Seeking Human, about newspapers, so I just went through all the newspapers that I could find that mentioned her name. And the earliest I could find was from Fall River Daily Evening News in Fall River, Massachusetts, and this was July 10th, 1865. It was a few months after Abraham Lincoln's assassination.
Okay.
And the reason she was brought up was because one of the alleged co-conspirators was Mary Surratt. Who was, you might recognize her name because she's, very historically.
She was involved in his assassination, right?
Yeah.
Because her daughter still haunts the White House. Oh. I guess after his assassination, her mom was one of the people who was going to be executed. And her daughter, Anna, back when you could just, walk up to the White House, she was, I guess she banged on the door in the middle of the night, begging for them to give her mom mercy.
Yeah.
And so now that's one of the ghosts that still show up at the White House. Is you'll hear banging on the door or see an apparition banging on the door, and they think it's Anna Surratt.
Yeah, and that makes sense because Mary Surratt was the first woman to be executed by the U.S. government. So it literally came from the president saying, hey, yeah, we are killing her. And also, I think after she was executed, they refused to give the body over to the family. I think that was another big thing. So I think they did eventually. It took some years, but I assume Anna was trying to also get the body back afterwards.
Sure.
So 3 days. So she ended up being executed, Mary Surratt. She was executed 3 days before this article was published. And this was, like I said, Fall River Daily Evening News in 1865. It was pretty short. It just says, Mrs. Surratt, not the first. In 1778, Bathsheba Spooner, a daughter of Timothy Ruggles, a Tory, was hung at Worcester with 3 men who, at her instigation, had murdered her husband. So, pretty factual. It just kind of laid it out like, hey, this has happened before. Here are the facts. And then it actually, just a little fun fact, it also made international news. It was in the Reynolds newspaper in London in July of 1865, where, because of Mary Surratt, they also mentioned Bathsheba Spooner as being another person who was executed. And then a year later, there was another article kind of a little more detail. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it was from Port Allen, Louisiana, and it brought up that her dad was a Tory. It talked about her being executed, why she was executed, but it was again just kind of like the basic facts, nothing too interesting, other than the regular story. But 1875, so 10 years later, her story really started to be romanticized. So it got weird. I started reading and I'm like, where did all of these details come from? Like, I never, I didn't read about any of this. And then all of a sudden it's like as if it's a work of fiction.
Did you find out about that because like you checked the date or the air? Like, how'd you find out that it was like as time went on, this got more flowery?
Yeah, so I searched in my, I've a subscription to newspapers.com because that's where I do most of my research. And so I searched for Bathsheba Spooner and I sorted it by year and I went through every single article. And thankfully her name is unique enough where it's not, there were a lot of Bathsheba mentions because Bathsheba is also a biblical figure. So there were a lot of random religious things in there, but it was pretty easy to find the articles that actually were talking about who I wanted them to talk about. And it got really, really flowery. It got really strange because, at first, as a loyalist, she wasn't well respected, that no one really
so it was probably like
they
didn't even want to give her the dignity of any additional facts, just like she died. Fun.
Yeah. And then it started to shift, though. So here's one. This is from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Intelligencer Journal, January 19th, 1875. And here's just a little, it was a lot. The whole article was about women in crime, but there was a whole segment about her. And this is about her execution. So here's what it says. Then she gave up hope and summoned courage. She dressed her handsome person in the richest brocade and lace, put on all her jewelry, and looked like a Copley picture as she stepped out of the country jail. Her health was so feeble that she could not walk. Her friends and neighbors had all come to see her hanged, and she bowed to them smilingly, acknowledging the attention. Whoa. They even hanged her poor lover, Ross, first, but she did not blench. As her turn came, a violent thunderstorm broke over the scene. She crawled on her hands and knees up the fatal ladder, too feeble to mount otherwise. The thunder and lightning increased in intensity. The prince of the powers of darkness had come to claim his daughter, the people thought. She did not blench, but died with a smile on her lips.
What is this, Little Women or something? That's the
right.
That is the that sounds like the beginning of erotica. Like it's so powerful and moving.
Yeah. And
wow.
That became the theme. It became very much about, more than just the crime. It turned into this fantastical story of this brave woman who fought, and sure, her husband was abusive. They started to bring these facts up as not necessarily to excuse what she did, but to say, look, she had a reason for it, and also she was pregnant. So the fact that played a big factor, I think, in a lot of these, because the fact that they killed a 5-month-old unborn child, and the people were of course rightfully not happy about that. And there's this article from the Holton Recorder in Holton, Kansas from 1878 that talks about that specifically. So it says, the surgeons to whom her body was given reported the same night that what she had said about herself was true, and the effect on the public mind was startling. So talking about how the surgeons were confirmed that she was in fact pregnant. The feeling against Mrs. Spooner had naturally been aggravated by prejudice against her family and her own open contempt for public opinion. But now that it was known that the vengeance of the law had fallen on her unborn child, there was intense mortification at the needless haste of the proceedings. The terror which her punishment was meant to cause was largely neutralized by pity for her sufferings, and her crime was almost lost sight of in admiration for her beauty, her energy, and her fortitude. So basically saying, because once they found out she was pregnant, everyone kind of shifted their view and looked at her not as a loyalist, but rather as this...
As a woman or a
as
mom.
A woman, and who has gone through this tragedy. And so that's when she kind of came back up again, and a lot of them also had some religious leanings too. So talking about how now she's with God now, and she and her unborn child are now with God. So it got very religious. And then there was another reason for why she'd be brought up again, and it was similar to the Mary Surratt case when other women killed their husbands. So
Oh,
this is
okay.
kind of like multiple true crime stories. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but
It's very meta right now of like a true crime show talking about true crime before there were true crime shows. It's very wild.
yeah. So in 1887, a woman named Roxana Drews murdered her husband. And this is an article from Scranton, Pennsylvania, March 2nd, 1887. It says, the approaching execution of Mrs. Drews calls attention to the criminal record of this city, and I find that while 100 men have been hanged here during the past century, the number of women is only 4, the latest case having occurred about 60 years ago. One of the most sensational cases of the kind that ever occurred in America was the execution of Bathsheba Spooner for the murder of her husband in Springfield, Massachusetts. And it says, it will be noticed that the women who suffer the death penalty are almost invariably murderers of their husbands, but of all such cases, the Drews tragedy is the most horrible, and hence the murderess has but little claim on public sympathy. And sure enough, there wasn't very little sympathy for Roxana Drews, who was executed, and she was the last woman to be executed by hanging in New York State. And part of the reason why she was the last was because her execution was botched,
Oh,
and it caused the New York State to switch the primary method of execution from hanging to electric chair.
wow.
So just a little sprinkle of a little fact in there. But
Just
then
yeah, just a whole sprinkle.
I don't know how to sprinkle true fun, the quote
It's
unquote fun facts
like a
into.
Salt Bay situation of like, and then the electric chair, you know?
In case anyone was wondering, I don't know. Like when was the last woman hanged in the state of New York?
No, I
Um,
mean, between that and shoe buckles, I feel like, and RuneScape, I'm learning so much today.
oh good, oh
So,
good,
yeah.
oh good. I might have some more things. Then 30 years later, there was another woman named Mary Rogers who was convicted of murdering her husband, and there was a lot of talk at the time about whether or not she was guilty, and then if guilty, whether or not she should be executed. And if executed, she would be the first woman. Oh, sorry, no. So because of this, there were a lot of retellings of the Bathsheba Spooner case because people were pointing to that and saying, hey, remember that time we executed this woman and it went really
Gotcha.
terribly? Like, let's maybe not make that same mistake. And again, because of that, they used very flowery language to try to talk about this case. So here's an example from the Boston
Sure.
Globe in 1903. This is specifically about her meeting Ezra Ross, the soldier, her lover. It says, Ross was now a young man of 18, fine-looking and soldierly, whom campaigning had developed into a man of the world. She
Oh,
was a woman of 33, beautiful and accomplished. Unhappy in her domestic life, she readily bestowed her love upon the dashing young soldier. His visit was prolonged. Like the lotus eaters of Homer, he
oh,
forgot to return home.
okay.
Yeah, I know, it's so dramatic.
I feel like every time you do this, it's getting more flowery and more Shakespearean. It's like they're really
Exactly.
trying to beat around the bush here on the facts.
Yeah. She was ever in his company, and they took long horseback rides through the romantic and beautiful Quabog Valley, till her love for the young soldier fermented into a guilty passion, which turned dislike for her aged husband into hatred. So yeah, it basically is as if you're telling like this romance novel and talking about it's bizarre. And these articles were very long too, so they had all like this whole they told the whole story this way. So they did talk about the facts, but whenever they did, they'd also bring in like in that last one a few articles ago about the thunderstorms at the execution happened. I'm like, I never read about that until I looked at these old newspapers, and they
Yeah.
were
Like, how
talking
do
about
you
it
know
as if
what the
some
weather
romance
was a
novel.
100 years later?
I,
Like,
yeah, I don't know. It's so weird. And then this next one might be even weirder. This one's from 1904. This is the Black Hills Union. It's a newspaper from Rapid City, South Dakota.
wow,
Um,
everyone's talking about this girl. Okay.
yeah, exactly. It's crazy. All over the place. And then here it says, she bowed gracefully to spectators whom she recognized, and when the time came, with a smile, she mounted the scaffold and acknowledged that her punishment was just. Taking the sheriff's hand, she said, "My dear sir, I am ready. In a little time I expect to be in bliss, and but a few years must lapse when I hope I shall see you and my other friends again. The
Whoa.
drop fell, and the awe-stricken spectators returned to their homes, not beside her kindred, but in a lonely grave on the hillside, in ground owned by a friend. The body of the beautiful enchantress was laid to rest, and the forgiving earth closed over her forever. Few in these days know the place, but whenever a sinning woman is condemned in Massachusetts to give up her life on the scaffold, the spirits of Bathsheba Spooner and her unborn child arise from the grave on the hillside to make pitiful appeal, and never without avail. It's very flowery language.
What a
half the words I don't
beautiful
know.
enchantress, and the earth ate her up. I mean, okay, so, where do I want to start? It's just, I mean, it's, first of all, I think it's shocking that people who had that ability to write were, like, comparatively, like, they were reporting on her, we're reporting on her, like, it has really dumbed down. Like, if those were the words they had to use before, and now we're talking about, like, belt buckles the whole time, like, the timeline of what reporting has turned into is very silly. And then on top of that, I really wish that somebody from back then could time travel to now just to, like, let us know how accurate that was.
Yeah.
Because if they were writing that in 1904 and she's, like, bowing to her friends and holding the guard's hand and hoping to see him again, I wish they could all be like, no, she kicked and screamed the whole way. Like, that's not what happened. And also, it wasn't storming outside.
Yeah,
like,
it makes you almost question these sources. I mean, especially because this isn't, I mean, there are some that are just like the Boston Globe. There's some in here that are just, they're legitimate newspapers. I mean, they're all, legitimate publications. But yeah, back then, what were their fact checkers? Who they can just kind of make up what they want. And then years later, we're like, oh, look, this newspaper article said this, but how accurate is it?
How much of it was guesswork, or how much of it was even, like, old school version of needing, like, to get the word count, and that's why it's so flowery. Like, it's like, I wonder how, that's a great point on, like, where reporting ended and just trying to get a story out began.
Yeah. And after that, though, I mean, a lot of the times that she'd be brought up a lot of them were just at least for a bit.
Podcasts.
About, like, not quite yet. That kind of comes in later, but it's kind of more of like fun facts. So what would happen is in a lot of these newspapers, they'd have the same fun facts, and I assume there's like a top newspaper company or whatever, and they would send the same information to all these newspapers across the country to publish. Similar to, I think, like nowadays, you'll get an article, and the article actually originated somewhere else. And then it was like sent out as a blast to all these different publications. Similar thing. And so there was a lot of columns about like random, it was, like a fun fact. And it just had, oh, here's some fun facts. So I saw them in Tennessee, Louisiana, North Carolina, and it was literally just a small box. And I think the top maybe said oddities or something, and it said that, or like trivia or something, and it said that she was the last legal execution of a woman in Massachusetts. And that was their little fun fact. It was a thing that people, I guess, would then talk about at dinner later that day. But then
it's like, Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna pivot, so you tell me what.
I was gonna say, it makes me think immediately of how the mighty have fallen. For that, like, you have this whole portrait of like the 1870s to early 1900s of like this flowery, might as well be a whole chapter of a book story dedicated to you.
Yeah.
And now you're like a blip on a tablet.
Yeah.
Like, that's like very interesting that at some point the story just kind of faded out of interest, or because like it lasted from the 1700s all the way up until like the 20th century. And then eventually people are like, we've done this enough, and just like kind of threw her to the wayside.
Yeah, it was less about the woman and more about the execution than anything. And then though she popped up again because another woman murdered her husband. Eva Kaber killed Daniel Kaber, her husband. She actually hired two men to do it, and this was in 1921. And so it's like a very similar type of case. So
yeah, it's like she reincarnated.
Yeah, exactly. And there was an article about executing women written in the Buffalo Times in Buffalo, New York in 1921. And it says, whenever a woman murderer, no matter how fiendish her crime, has been sentenced to capital punishment in the U.S., at once a furor of sentiment against putting to death a member of what is considered the gentler and the finer sex has been aroused, and governors have been besieged to stay her execution. Such a feeling of pity for women, just because she is a woman, although devoid of the moral attributes of her sex, already is making itself known in the Caber murder case, alleged to have been plotted by women, and for which 4 women are indicted for first-degree murder and face the electric chair. So basically saying, nowadays, look, yes, they're women, but we should still execute them. Like, we used to execute them, and that's what they brought up later in this article. They brought up Bathsheba's case to say, look, we used to do this, but nowadays we're very, hesitant to kill women just because they're women.
Right.
So it was just an interesting look into the time. I don't know what that means for society now or anything, but and she was later.
I feel like you could deep dive into the social, standards at that time. That could become its own whole topic. So.
Yeah. And I won't go into that, but what I will say is that Eva Caber was sentenced to life in prison, so she was not executed.
Gotcha.
And then 24 years later, Bathsheba makes another appearance, but for a different reason. This is because, this is 1945, someone found Joshua Spooner's grave. So
what?
They found his grave, and a similar blast was sent to all these different newspapers, including this one in the Star Phoenix, which is in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. This is August 1945, and it just says, "Epitaph tells all. Brookfield, Massachusetts. In the village cemetery is the grave of Joshua Spooner, whose epitaph says he was murdered by 3 soldiers of the Revolution, Ross, Brooks, and Buchanan, at the instigation of his wife, Bathsheba." And that's it. And that was sent to a bunch of newspapers I read had the same little, again, another fun fact. And it's all because someone discovered the grave and thought, oh, this is interesting. And so they didn't have any more details. All they knew was someone found this grave.
Yeah. Wow. And then meanwhile, there were actually a shocking amount of accounts about it if you look 100 years ago. That's wow.
It was a lot harder back then to look and find all of these accounts. So
they didn't have findagrave.com.
Yeah.
But wow. And also that's on his epitaph. Can you imagine if the way you died or the way you were murdered is the only thing people are going to remember about you 300 years later?
Right.
Wow.
And then, well, I mean, it could be argued that if he hadn't been murdered, he wouldn't be remembered at all.
Okay. That's one way to look at it too.
A wealthy farmer. His dad was a merchant, so I don't think he had as far as I knew, no political aspirations or anything like that. So he was, and I don't think he had any role. I don't even know if he would consider himself a Tory. I don't know if he was. Yeah. He was just kind of there. But then again, he was murdered, so who knows what he could have become. But then, similar to that podcast thing, in 1951, there was a series titled Album of Famous Mysteries, and it included the story of Bathsheba, but they called it The Case of the Old Man and the Young Wife. So they're already talking about the age difference between the two and already kind of setting it up as this woman who was in this terrible predicament got out through murder. And yeah, then again, presented like a work of fiction. So we got back to that, and there were different radio. So I saw a lot of things on the schedule this week, and it was radio broadcasts and telling her story. So
wow,
she became a little bit of a legend, a true legend, but still, it was a very let's talk about the legend of Bathsheba Spooner, but again, very flowery and kind of almost like it's a work of fiction. And the subheading for that one was, while Ross was recovering from his wounds, Bathsheba remained devotedly at his side. Later, she was to prove her devotion in another, more sinister way. It's really just setting it up that as if it's this crazy, this fictional, this story, a romance story. I don't know.
I know. Imagine also if you were either of them, or even the 2 men who killed them, and to know that people are still finding new ways to present your story of what happened, and it's all making you look kind of good.
Yeah. She did held up pretty well story wise, I'd say.
I know.
But yeah, CBS Radio played this thing called Crime Classics, which dramatized different stories, and one of them was called The Crime of Bathsheba Spooner. So that's a little fun thing. And then this is the thing I sent you an image for. So okay. There's an article in the Billings Gazette in Billings, Montana from 1977, and it was reprinted from the Farmer's Almanac. So the Farmer's Almanac did a little story on Bathsheba Spooner, and oh my God, is the illustration intense.
Let me see.
So if you open that up,
Oh,
it
yep.
is. I saw that and I was like, "Woo!"
It is a drawing for people who are not on YouTube or who aren't on our Instagram. It is a sketch of a woman being hanged, and there are literal men with axes in the crowd, like all watching her, and they seem at least neutral about the fact that she's hanging there.
Yeah,
And it
and
says
it's
an
dark.
unborn child pays for murder when his guilty mother is hanged. It was she, beautiful, charming, socially prominent, judged, author, and procurer of the bloody event, whom the people especially came to see hanged. She was charming, beautiful, and a murderess.
Yeah. So it just got very, again, like they're presenting it as like, look at the, it's for as if it's for entertainment purposes rather than for
Yeah.
just factual purposes.
The sketch itself, I mean, it wasn't drawn like in a bubble format or anything, but it looked like it almost could have just been like a comic.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
You
It's
know?
so weird, yeah.
Yeah.
And then comes one of my favorite mentions, which I think was really interesting. It's from 1982, and it was a Statesman Journal in Salem, Oregon. And someone wrote into the editor about Bathsheba Spooner and had this to say. Bathsheba Spooner planned the murder of her husband 204 years ago, and 3 accomplices carried out the crime. Bathsheba was desperate, and women were not allowed the choices women have today: divorce and abortion. Had Bathsheba got a divorce for her abusive husband without social humiliation and rejection, she would have borne her lover's baby and kept the child. Had she been able to have an abortion, she could have tried to save her marriage. Given one of the choices, she might not have planned to kill her husband, and she, along with the 3 men, wouldn't have been hanged. Bathsheba begged her executioners to let her give birth to the baby, then carry out the sentence, but she was refused. Shortly after the hanging, an autopsy was performed on her that revealed a 5-month-old male fetus. 6 lives were lost because of oppression. We need to hang on to our choices that keep us from becoming desperate, because desperate people usually find ways to end their torment. Colleen Hardman,
Wow.
Salem, Oregon. So it was really interesting to see someone who not only knew about the story or read about the story, but then related it to today's times.
world.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So it was really
Wow.
interesting to read that and that was after I hadn't read about. It didn't pop up much anymore, and then all of a sudden, in a letter to the editor, someone so well lays the story out in the context of today's world, which I thought was really cool.
And also it felt, I mean, it makes sense because it's coming up closer and closer to like our actual timeline, but the reporting seemed like what I consider solid reporting, in that it seemed kind of, here are the facts, here's a slight opinion, but like, let's not make it too puffy and beautiful. And
Yeah.
so it seemed like it was almost a better explanation of the scenario to begin with.
It wasn't like the brave enchantress.
Yeah, I want to I take it more seriously compared to the other ones.
Exactly. So. Yeah. And then there's only one more mention that I could find, and it's the most recent one. This is from 2017. And
wow,
it
really went the whole gamut, Xandy.
I really did. I tried to find everything I could. And this is from the Boston Globe again. So we're back to her being talked about in the Globe. February 19th, 2017. It's like a fun fact thing about Brookfield, Massachusetts. And so on it has 1939, and then it talk about a cow that was born in 1939 in the town, and it has like a little history thing.
Imagine if you're that cow, like you are still making headlines.
Right. And then it says 1,700, which is the number of luminaries placed on Brookfield Common, Lincoln Street, and Route 9, and lit each year in a holiday tradition. So it has like these little fun facts about the town, and then it has the number 32. And it says 32. Age of Brookfield resident Bathsheba Spooner when she reportedly was the first woman hanged in the United States by Americans, not the British. The wife of Joshua Spooner, Bathsheba was hanged in Worcester on July 2nd, 1778, after plotting with a member of the Continental Army and 2 British soldiers to kill her husband and stuff him down a well. She was 5 months pregnant when she died. And then there's a picture of, it looks like a tombstone, but it says, Spooner Well. Joshua Spooner murdered and thrown down this well March 1st, 1778 by 3 revolutionary soldiers at the urging of his wife. So It's just like a little local, have a little local flavor of what's going on in Brookfield, Massachusetts, and she gets a final mention as a little fun fact, including a picture of the spot where her husband Joshua was thrown down the well.
Wow. Wow.
That's
Okay.
all. That's Bathsheba Spooner's journey through time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the earliest time traveler. Wow, I do like that there was it kind of peppered in there. There was a few just like random fun facts. It really was quite a range of like, here is this very long verse of the most detail possible, and then here's like a throw a bone situation.
Yeah. Like
How
she got,
do you know if if you didn't look at any other podcasts? That's fine. Do you know if any other podcasts have covered her?
I have no idea.
Okay, so
I
it would have been
couldn't tell
fun
you.
if we were the first since 2017 to mention her.
That would be fun, but I don't know. Let's pretend we are.
Okay.
No, I'm not sure. It's bad. I think you're similar to me though. I don't really listen to podcasts much.
Yeah.
So I didn't really use podcasts for research. I actually didn't think about it until you mentioned that.
No, I mean, you literally used like hundreds of years of newspapers. I think you're fine. You know what's I don't know if you would know this because I just imagine, I don't know. I like to think of you as a plethora of knowledge. And also you have a whole podcast on newspaper clippings. So do you happen to know, this is very random, how people even searched for things before the internet for newspapers? Like if you were in the 1850s, how did you find information about someone from the 1700s?
I think that everything has been, or at least at a certain point, started to be cataloged and placed in like local libraries or government buildings where they'd have any edition of a newspaper would be saved because with newspapers.com, it's all, these scans of these old newspapers. And I believe they got them from the archives. So they'd have an archives and they have archivists whose main job was to preserve these old newspapers. And eventually now, thankfully, with technology, they've been able to scan all of these newspapers. And it's fun. Like, I don't know if you get the emails, but every once in a while, I get an email from newspapers.com saying a new newspaper is available. And it's like some random one from a rinky-dink town from the 1800s that, like, I guess someone...
It's never a mind-blowing article, but no offense to newspapers.com. I'm still waiting for like, here's a newspaper about aliens coming down to Earth.
Yeah.
No, because I mean, I guess I don't know what the right word is. It's not privileged or entitled, but I think I'm just so not part of the archive community that I'm just blissfully unaware of some of the jobs that exist out there. But I there's like a certain point in time where I can think back enough and think like, oh, they probably were able to like more easily than I'm aware of find articles from forever ago. But like once you hit like the 1940s, 1930s, in my mind, it just becomes like an impossible task.
Yeah.
And I like, at what point did people start archiving, I wonder? Because for them to have had, I know now with newspapers.com, it's probably easier, but how did people in that 1904 one, how on earth did they know about Bathsheba in the 1700s? Crazy.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, speaking about that, the earliest one that I found, the earliest article was from the 1800s. I would bet good money that the newspapers back in 1776 or whatever publications they had definitely talked about this murder and her execution, but I just didn't have access to anything like that.
Right.
So I assume that there were no archives, or at least not where I was looking, of those newspapers. So that's why I said the earliest I found, because there's no way that her first mention was in 1865. It had to have been earlier than that. But yeah, then again, how did the people in 1865 like read up about this case? I assume, they went and looked up the archives, whatever
or
that
honestly,
means.
maybe they just heard it from their grandparents, because wouldn't they have been around from the 1700s?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Who knows? I mean, I just think of little things like that. And by the way, if you work at newspapers.com and you're looking for like a new angle to like really draw people in, y'all should have a drop down, like a category for like just like true crime, or like do them in like like people's interests, and just do like, because I'm sure that would become such a useful tool for people who are researching true crime all the time, to like, if you could just type in Bathsheba and just get a list of a true crime person. You could do it for other categories too, but true crime and paranormal would bode well for me only.
That's a good start, I'd say. Yeah.
I would love to, like, I have newspapers.com this feels like a big ad for newspapers.com all of a sudden, but I have it for myself because I'm really into ancestry. But if I could rely on a source like that for just like paranormal articles, oh my God, my life would be so much easier. Like it would be very cool. I've never been able to use newspapers for a spooky story yet. That'd be very fun one day. So
Yeah. No, I recommend, because when I first started this wasn't my plan. I found her and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'm going to go read up on it. And then I was like, let me check newspapers.com. And then the story formed around me where I was reading these articles. I'm like, this is getting wild. What are they They're calling her an enchantress? Like I
wish I was in the
wasn't.
room. I wish I was in the room the second it got really flowery for you, and you're like, what?
Like, I went from like some research papers about her, and I was like Wikipedia, obviously, and then I went into those sources from there, and I was like very factual, and then I'm like, let's check newspapers.com. I'm like, wait a second, why did newspapers not, or why did Wikipedia not mention the crazy thunderstorms that happened apparently, like the moment she was executed?
I felt a little like that with Bunnyman Bridge, just because I expected like a bunch of Reddit forums of like, what's your urban legend from your hometown? And that's what it looked like a while ago, which is why like my own hometown friends have been like, why haven't you covered our literal urban legend?
Yeah.
And I've been like, there's just not enough information, which like, this is a PSA to everybody. If I haven't covered your urban legend and you've suggested it to me, there might just not be enough information. But because I have to have a certain amount of notes to be able to like gauge whether or not I'm going to have enough information to tell a story that's worth the time, or like, worth a literal time limit. And maybe if you're listening though, and I haven't covered yours, like give me the suggestion again, and maybe it's grown overnight like Bunnyman Bridge did, because when I checked this time versus like a year ago or 2 years ago, it's a completely different Google page. So yeah, everyone cross your fingers for your urban legend to just all of a sudden blow up with information.
Yeah, because there's so many different archives out there, and there's so much information out there that people just haven't discovered yet, that, or at least hasn't gone mainstream enough where you can just Google it and it'll pop up. So yeah, you never know. Suddenly something might happen, and it'll be back in the public eye. And sure enough, all these newspapers will talk about it, because like all these different articles I mentioned about Bathsheba, I'm sure when they were published, it was the first time any of these people heard of her. Mm-hmm. Even though there have been in the past multiple times she was mentioned, but she kept popping back up. And in 2017, same thing with that article. I bet a lot of people in Boston were like, huh, never heard of this story.
Yeah.
And then who knows, like 10 years from now, maybe another woman would kill her husband and she'll pop up again.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how that works. Yeah.
Well, I don't actually know what time this comes out, because we're recording way in advance. Like it's not even Halloween yet when we were recording this, but I think we are coming up on Christmas. So just so we like feel like we have time traveled into everyone else's world. Before we end, do you have any holiday plans coming up? Do you feel, if you can imagine yourself on like the couple weeks before December 25th, are you feeling stressed about Christmas shopping or anything yet?
Oh, I'm always feeling stressed about Christmas shopping, I'm sure. Yes. So yes, I am.
Okay.
I don't have gifts for anyone, I'm sure, at this point. But it's going to be an exciting time because, I mean, I don't know what my sister's plans are or anything, but, now Leona's here. And so like our family grew this year, and it's going to be, and it's, last year it was my first Christmas alone because I was in LA and I couldn't travel home for it. And I was just in my 1-bedroom apartment. So anything for this Christmas will be better than last Christmas. But yeah, and
yeah, this is
our family has grown. So
I was gonna say this is this is gonna be my first Christmas back home too, because COVID. I was inside on my. Actually, no, I wasn't inside for Christmas last year. All during COVID, Eva and I were each other's quarantine buddies, and we did not see a single other person except each other for like 8 months or something. It was very wild. But the only time I left my home was to go to Eva's. And we decided, because Allison took the leap and went home for Christmas, but then she quarantined by herself for 2 weeks before we got to see each other again. So I ended up being alone on Christmas and the 2 weeks after that. So Eva and I hung out for Christmas, and I remember she made this really good, like, I think it was like some sort of breakfast casserole. And then I ended up making like mac and cheese for us, and we got like we had like, I think we bought like a whole cheesecake and just like went to town on it. Something happened. I remember making it like an ultra feast of sorts. But so I'm very excited to, no offense, Eva, I'm excited to see my family for Christmas this year instead of doing a Zoom Christmas. I sat right here and watched my whole family open presents by the fire with Christmas music, and I was like barely in pants and
Yeah.
just watching them from afar. So I don't know what my plans are yet. I don't know even if I'm in California when this comes out, but whatever happens. Oh, you know what? If this is the week I think it is, the Spider-Man 3 movie's coming out.
Ooh.
It's a big time for me in the future world. So anyway, thank you for coming on. I'm going to figure out with Eva when the actual Christmas episode comes out, and we'll have to, address it when
We'll address Christmas.
we're
Yeah,
there.
my brain is not there yet because we're not even on Halloween, but I will
Yeah.
pretend it's there.
Me
Maybe
too.
next
Me too.
episode.
I'll put on a Santa hat or something and we'll make it real festive.
I love it. I love it.
Well, thank you, Xandy. Come back next week and I guess we're going to pretend it's Christmas or something.
Sounds like a plan. I love it. Thank you.
And
That's
why
we
drink.